So thank you guys. So obviously to initiate these discussions, I needed three champions, representatives from the industry, consulting world, and academia. So maybe we can start by introducing yourselves quickly and then we'll trigger the discussion. Thank you. Elliot.
Okay, hi everybody. I'm Elliot Skershkin. I'm an assistant professor of earth science and environmental science at Carleton University. And I think part of the reason I'm here is because my work has jumped between, I've always been kind of working on environmental science problems, but in close connection with various partners, including industrial partners. So in my PhD, I worked on developing new techniques to monitor metal release in mine waste. I did some postdoc work in the Yukon looking at metals in baseline environmental conditions. Now as a professor, I've been also pursuing similar projects with First Nation partners, with Yukon government, and with industrial partners. So I've kind of got a foot in a bunch of different doors here, but hopefully I can share some perspective on that from my experience into how these partnerships can be successful.
Thank you. Oliver.
Yeah. Good morning, everyone. I'm Oliver Curran. I'm the Vice President of Environment and Permitting with Snowline Gold. I've been with the mining industry now for 26 years or so. I've had the opportunity to oversee environmental compliance and permitting projects all across Canada and also in places like Indonesia and New Caledonia. So relevant to this session, I've had broad exposure to reclamation techniques in all sorts of climate. I'm a biologist by training. I did my undergrad at Trent University, so great to see Yukon Seed using some of Trent University's academic expertise. And I started off in consulting with Jake Switford. I did that for about 5 years and worked for mining proponents during those 5 years. And I was working on a really cool, historically contaminated site, back on the shore of Lake Ontario. Really unique area that it had, high calcareous conditions. And so unlike the Sudbury mines, you had extraordinary levels of metals in the soil, but high pHs. And so you had these beautiful forests. You had amphibians in the ponds and fish in the creeks. And so I thought, wow, this is a really good opportunity to get involved in some academic research to understand all the mechanisms for metal transfer through plants, et cetera. And so, again, relevant to this session, I was working as a consultant. I got involved in a master's thesis, and I did my master's at the University of Toronto in the Department of Botany. So mining for me has been just an excellent way to use my skill set and also oversee the excellent work that consultants do, as well as academics on our mine sites globally. So thank you.
Thank you. Ethan.
Yeah, my name's Ethan Allen. I'm a born and raised Yukon guy. I'm a geologist by training, and I got to spend the early part of my career working in exploration in the Yukon, and then I got to apply my my geology background to environmental geochemistry, helped with environmental assessment, licensing, regulatory processes in the Yukon, and really had a great opportunity over the last decade to be a founder of Core Geoscience, which I'm a principal of. And yeah, it's a great pleasure to be here with you guys, and I know Elliot and Oliver a bit professionally, and yeah, happy to be here.
Thank you. So to trigger the discussion between research, consulting world, and to serve the industry, on the top of my head, when I think about differences, research, academia, we have training mandates, different timelines, third-party funding, different scope of work. These are different worlds. So my first question for maybe the consulting world over there will be, when engaging with a mining project, in what areas do you feel the support of researchers is most valuable or necessary? And Elliot, keep that question in mind because I have the exact same one for you.
Yeah, I'm sure this will resonate with everyone on the panel who've been on, obviously, a lot of different sides of the table and experienced different things. But yeah, in my current role as a consultant, obviously, we're driven by, often by budgets and timelines. We spend a lot of time looking at environmental data, collecting environmental data, and applying that to regulatory compliance or whatever it is. In that process, the state of science is never perfect. We're always learning more, and there's always gaps in our knowledge that often that we don't have the luxury to be able to explore fully because of limitations, as I said, to time and budget. But often we can receive support from people in academia or others who have similar experiences, who have more time and ability to kind of help us solve those problems.
Of course, your turn.
I mean, I think, Ethan, you set the stage well. And one thing I found working with consultants, and I should say also after my PhD, I spent 2 years as a postdoc, as a MITAX-funded postdoc with a consultant. And I'd worked with that consultant, Lorax, a whole bunch previously. So one thing I see a lot at Lorax, I've also seen it with Corgeo and Ethan, is the consultants are, I mean, they're passionate for science. They've got great ideas, as you heard earlier with the cryoconcentration, water purification method. But often on the consulting budget, there's not the budget and the time to go pursue those scientific questions. And so I found working with consultants, they usually know, what's going on. They usually know what is not known. But they don't have the time. They would love to have the time, but they don't necessarily have the time in their consulting scope to do that. And I found when I was working as a MITAX postdoc, it was wonderful because there was all of this baseline environmental monitoring data that had been collected. This was at the coffee and casino sites, and I kind of had free reign over a 2-year period of time to look at all that data, integrate it. Pull it together from different projects to get kind of a bigger understanding on what are some of the controls on the baseline environment in that context. So having that extra time as an academic gives us the ability to kind of pursue questions that aren't possible within industrial budgets and timelines. And one thing I'll add to that is also as academics, we're sometimes one step removed, which also gives us a different framework of thinking around science questions. And so in that previous work, basically launched a lot of what I do in my research now, which was going back 7 years or so, looking at areas where there's high baseline metals concentrations, or where there's permafrost, and that permafrost is influencing how water moves or the chemistry of that water. And at the time, I would say I wasn't really seeing on the industry side a lot of understanding of thinking about if permafrost thaws, how does that actually change the movement of water and the movement of potential contaminants in that water. So as an academic, we have the luxury of kind of not thinking about what's happening next week or next month, but thinking more like what's happening in 5 years or 10 years. And so that partnership also enabled me to kind of ask those questions and produce research to kind of think more about the long range, because I'm not tied to the same immediate, urgent deadlines all the time.
Deadlines is one of the big ones, eh? On a side note, I haven't realized that almost all of the presentations mention MITAX, and we have a MITAX rep in the room. So I think MITAX is one of these a bridge that makes those collaboration between academia and industry possible. So thanks to MITAX.
I'll say like the MITAX proposal process is very straightforward.
Yeah, we do recommend. Oliver, as the industrial rep, and based on what has been said and discussed, how do you assess when to engage with researchers versus consultants, and what drives your decision?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I guess in the simpler terms, consultants are very good at executing on field work that has prescribed or known procedures. So I guess, the work that Corgeo is doing at our site as we speak, they installed groundwater wells this summer for our hydrogeology program, and they're at our site right now sampling those wells. So very prescribed methods to satisfy the regulatory system in Yukon. So that's a great role for consultants. Whereas research, you're trying to figure out novel solutions for vegetating tailings, for example, where there's not known practices, and that's where researchers really come in, and academics. And then there's the whole aspect of having students do a master's program, say at the Snowline site, and research and engage the university. I think all of those things are equally important. But the simple answer, Guillaume, to your question is I think the time is now for consultants and research at our site. So if we, Snowline eventually wants to bring our site obviously into production, and those sorts of academic research studies, whether it be on wildlife or plants, they need to start sooner than later because they take years. So the short answer is consultants have a defined role, researchers do, and it can all occur at the same time. And sometimes it's actually great to have consultants team up with researchers and manage their work at site.
Any of you can share examples of successful examples or examples that failed. We can also learn from our mistakes of successful collaboration or not so successful collaboration.
I can certainly speak to a number of examples. I want to meet the Mitacs person in the room. Okay, yeah, so just one example for people who may have seen my presentation yesterday. When I was working on the Mary River project, our shipping route on the south end of Baffin Island was 1,000 kilometers from the mine site. Just not economically, or a whole bunch of safety considerations on doing research in those remote areas. So we teamed up with Environment Canada. They did sporadic research in the region, but they were always trying to get funding from the government to do that work. And so some years they would get the work, some years they wouldn't. And so you have this sporadic, spotty data for the work they were trying to accomplish. So in that case, we needed baseline information for our project on seabirds. We teamed up with Environment Canada. We gave $100,000 per year for a 3-year period. And Environment Canada, through Mitacs and NSERC, turned that into $400,000 plus. So it was a win-win. Government got the information they needed, which is actually funding a global initiative to, track seabirds in the Arctic region, and the company basically, to be frank, got a bargain on research dollars.
I think that's a pretty common thread too in research. I mean, I hate to say this, but unfortunately in Canada, we don't have the same research funding mechanisms that you have in the United States or in Europe. But what that means is we need to get money from a lot of different places. And so when you're like an industrial partner looking at a question that you're trying to solve, the way we do things is always to multiply money, right? It's, you contribute a little bit of money. Grants can come in, and grants can sometimes provide $2 for every dollar that you're putting in, or $3 for every dollar that you're putting in. So you get these matching funds, and then all of a sudden a lot of work can get done with a very small budget for all of the people who are contributing. I see this time and time again. And the current work I'm doing in Whitehorse is a great example of that. It's not necessarily directly with industrial partners. We have local government partners, but if I add up all of the in-kind costs, so we're working on about $600,000 of grant money, but we're doing a project that has a value easily of $1.5 million, $2 million, because we're getting these contributions from grants, from partner organizations, and I think that partnership is really the way that we need to do things to move forward in Canada. And when you have industry partners, you have consultants, it's about bringing these people together to kind of work towards a common goal, and achieving more with less resources is always what we end up having to do, and it's possible.
Yeah, thanks. Ethan, as a company trying to do, like your consulting business, but you're trying to do research, how do you manage the different expectations, and how do you try to collaborate with the industry in that regard?
I can just think of a couple examples. Obviously, that were just presented, Daria and the cryopurification project. So far, that's been primarily driven by Corgeo and all the different partnerships and sponsors that we've had, working that towards commercialization. And obviously, our our recent agreement in principle with Selkirk Copper is an exciting kind of avenue where we're going to be kind of directly engaging with mining industry, and we're really look forward to their questions and their hard questions that they're going to ask about how we're going to really make it work on the ground. I have to also refer to Christina and Yukon Seed, which is again very applied, but also a research component to a lot of what they're doing there, which we're involved in. One more example of what Corgeo does, kind of off the side of our desk, is we have a project with Environment Canada monitoring mercury and other contaminants up at Little Fox Lake. And so we help manage that research and conduct that research for Environment Canada.
Thanks. There is something that I wanted to touch base on, and I don't know if you guys feel the same, but researchers, when I was talking to the media, tends to be trusted. When a researcher, academia talks, he's more trusted. First of all, do you agree? And if yes, where does that come from? The peer-reviewed process, the scientific methodology that researchers have to follow, is there something there that can be investigated or discussed?
I think there's a lot of importance to that. I mean, especially with the mining sector or environmental areas where things can be contentious, and there's a perception, a public perception, and I think it's a fair one that academics don't have necessarily the same conflicts of interest, right? So if you're a mining proponent, of course your objective is to develop your resource and to open your mine. And I think there's a lot of value in partnering with academics. I see it very regularly in my work because we are kind of in this middle ground where we're not necessarily directly tied to a specific, partner. And so we do have the ability to be a bit more arm's length, take a step back, and I think there's maybe not as much inherent mistrust coming from academics. I will say academics, we're all humans, and everyone has their biases, and the important thing is building relationships you trust with the people that you're working with, because there's some academics out there who have an agenda or another agenda, and people are people, and they'll always be people. But by and large, I think if you approach an academic and you're able to build a trustful relationship with them, it can be very valuable, because when we're communicating results to the public, we're mandated to do that as academics. We're mandated to publish papers, to do outreach events like we're doing here, to train people. And so we're able to do that a bit more freely, and I think that there's generally, it is easier to share information on topics that can be contentious when it's coming from an academic, because there's not the same perception that there's an inherent conflict of interest to put that information out there. So I feel like as an academic, that's partially our role too, is to provide information, to the public for the well-being of the public, and to do that in an open manner.
Yeah, I think I would agree to that. And from the industry perspective, in my career, I've certainly taken advantage of using universities or academics or master's thesis students to do research at the mine site. So there is that kind of arm's length from the project. And so it serves its industry really well. I'll give you an example. One project I worked at, having peregrine falcons that like to nest in outcrops that are near the deposit that you're mining. That was work that I handed off to a PhD university professor, and he had multiple students come up to the site and tag these peregrine falcons over a number of years. And what we found out about these birds was absolutely incredible, like circumpolar navigation. All of that information was completely hands-off from the industry. We let them publish their results, the effects or no effects of the mine. So that was an excellent collaboration. Having said that, the work that, for example, Insero is doing at our site on hydrology and everything, these are professionals that have credentials, that are signing off on the work. Much of the baseline data collection that happens at our sites is scientifically defensible. It has to be reviewed by all the experts in government. So it is really, really solid work. So I would say it's kind of a mix where you use academics where you need to, but there's a lot of excellent work that the consultants do. And these are professional biologists or hydrologists, and they put their names to the work that they do at our sites that essentially gets published in environmental assessments and on the public record. So I don't want to downplay the importance of both academics and consultants.
I think also on the trust building side, that's where, as academics, we're of course mandated to publish in journals, and increasingly open access journals, right? So when we put out information, it should be accessible to all Canadians. We're after all funded by tax dollars. And what I like to see, and I've seen a lot of this in research because my research is often intersected with like mine waste management, for example, where a mine site recognizes there's certain challenges, water quality challenges, and partner with academic organizations to figure out, what are those challenges and how do we handle them. And what is really nice to see is then journal publications that often involve co-authorship between the technical people in the mining sector and academics, where we get together and we say, look, here's kind of an issue, here's what we know about how we can maybe treat it. And I think that also helps build public trust, because it shows that the sector is not hiding anything, right? It's like, we know what's coming up, and we are proactively working on research questions to address these challenges, to find solutions. And I think that can reflect very well, too, to get added perception. I certainly agree also that all of the technical work that goes in reports and in the permitting process and the design stage is all high quality work, but it's not always as publicly visible as like open access publications. And so that there's a space for both of those to kind of show to the public, this is what we're doing, this is what we know, this is what we don't know.
Go for it.
Yeah, I'll just jump in really quick. Appreciate Oliver's defense of the consultants as being credible, and indeed we strive to be impartial and professional, of course. But to me, yeah,
There's a lot of poor quality publications in academia too.
That's fair.
So I'll put that out there.
That's fair. But I do think that academia will always have a special place. And in your earlier comments, you mentioned there that you sometimes, in academia, you can have a broader perspective sometimes as consultants, where maybe our question really pertains to one or two different projects, whereas you often in academia can have sort of more a multidisciplinary or a bigger perspective on the question, which can help with ensuring that it's impartial.
Can I just add a point on the timelines, because we have a minute left and we haven't touched on this, but
All right.
I also want to just, the timelines is one of the challenges, right? You ask what are the challenges, and the timelines is kind of the timelines that research takes versus consulting projects. And I think it's important to be open about that, because research, to be frank, we may be experts in our domain, but we don't know what we're doing. We're researchers, we're always doing something new. And so it always takes a lot of time to go through all these trial processes to get to an achieved result. And so the timelines for research, it's always, months is extremely short, it's always years. And so the successful partnerships are where there's a long-range problem that a partner can know, we're gonna have to deal with this in a few years, and how can we get started on it now? That's kind of a reasonable timeline to approach a research question. It's much more difficult when it's like, we have a disaster, it happened yesterday, and we need it dealt with tomorrow. That's very difficult for the research side.
Thank you. I mean, that could go on and on, I feel, which is a good sign. Unfortunately, we're already 10 minutes behind. I would like to leave just 2-3 minutes for questions, if you guys have questions, and give you the opportunity to have a 15-minute break, well deserved, for coffee. So 2-3 minutes for questions. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much, guys. This was wonderful. Just in terms of thinking about research consultants and the future, a broad spectrum in terms of the industry itself, I think it will be really interesting, or maybe some of the industry partners, they may have research and ethics arm in their own mandates before reaching out to the territorial or federal government, that would be really wonderful to see. I mean, definitely, Oliver did touch a point that they do work with research partners, but if this becomes much more open, there would be a lot of transparency and trust built in, specifically when you're trying to work with the First Nation communities. So just my thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I'll comment on those thoughts. It's an excellent point. And again, the research that I've had done at some of the mine sites I've worked at, I was, really surprised at the level of and the rigor that the government had to go through with ethic committees and ultimately getting that partnership signed off with the Deputy Minister of Environment Canada, or the Canada's Environment Minister. It went to that level because they are very concerned of being connected with industry on research. So I think I broke through some barriers. I know at the time in talking with these government officials, that was the first time that research of that level was undertaken by a mining company and the federal government. But we overcame a ton of barriers. There was mechanisms to ensure that data was at arm's length from the company. So I'm kind of proud of that partnership, and I think it kind of paves the way for other partnerships with other mining companies.
Oh, quick last. And then I will invite you to follow up during the coffee break.
Yeah, this will probably shock you, but my company started 40 years ago, research. And I made research products. ACR Systems is my company, loggers throughout the world for data. And my motto in my company is, without data, it's just another opinion. And it is. And I got to admit, I like the combination. The other fact is my company is First Nations. I never advertised First Nations because back in those days, if you said you're First Nations, your credibility dropped down to about here because we weren't all educated, and it made a big difference. By switching it over and saying, I'm educated, but the people I hired were educated, so it was an engineering company. But research is the key, and you said it, that it hasn't happened yet. You don't know what you're doing. You develop it. So I developed data loggers, and they became famous. And if you ever get a chance to Google Albert Rock Racing Loggers, which they all went right from the Yukon here, straight through to Indianapolis for 13 years straight for all the research on race cars, NASCAR, and then Formula One. And that's how far it went. But I've left Canada now because it's all in the United States. 70% of my sales are US. Still manufactured in Canada. And if you get a chance to see that, I mean, I wish we should show it here. Maybe one chance is just Google it, Albert Rock Racing Logger. And that product started here. And we was on the Challengers. Every accident, every crash, disasters are key. We did the Challengers, both the takeoff one and the landing when they had the real problem. And the big dig in Boston. Some huge disasters, but that's when we really make sales, is when there's a disaster.
Thank you. Please engage with our panelists. Thank you very much, guys, for the nice talks, and wish you to see you guys soon. The coffee break is sponsored by SLR. Please come back at 10:30. And thank you for attendance today for the environmental session. Thank you very much.